Greetings, friends.
My name is Steve Kelsey.
And I'm Ron Leota, and this is The Roles We Play, the show about the roles we play in the games we love. On the show today, Steve is going to be grilling me all about my LARP career because we haven't talked about that yet, so hopefully you're ready to go.
I am so ready for this. All right, so quarantine caught us has stalled this out, and I still definitely plan to have you take me on a LARP, and we're gonna film that and talk about it, and it's gonna be amazing. But it means
that'll be like next year
this
because
was
all the
something
LARPs are
I was
canceled.
excited about this year to do, and that's not going to happen, nor should it. It's not safe to do it this year, so we're not going to.
No, we I mean, most event planners have been canceling all their stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, every concert I bought tickets for this year, I've just been getting the rolling in. By the way, you'll see Deftones next year. That's cool. I'm waiting to hear whether or not I'll see They May Be Giants this year. Probably better if I don't.
Probably. It's just probably simpler because it's not going to get better in the fall and winter. That's not how flu/cold viruses work.
Well, let's not bum everybody out with the stuff they already know.
Let's talk about the good stuff. The good stuff is, so, little disclaimer, even though Death Star has a song that includes LARPing in it, that was the MC3PO side of Death Star, I have never LARPed other than the briefest of half LARP. At one of your LARP festivals where I believe MC3PO had like a puzzle or a thing. I can't quite remember. We were drinking. I was smoking. Or eating something, but that was affecting me. But yeah, I've never like properly LARPed or even done like SCA type stuff or anything like that. I've known LARPers over the years. I've absolutely never had any kind of real judgment one way or the other in LARPing. It's just felt like a lot. It felt like a lot of commitment, and I'm not about that life. It feels like so much work, and I'm like, can't I just be sitting and eating nachos while doing this? Which is why tabletop was my space. But
do I have a story for you?
Yeah. So we're gonna start at the beginning.
Sure.
Ronald Bartholomew Leota. When did you? I assume that's your middle name. Bartholomew is a classic name. It's normal.
It's Falealo, but close enough.
To be clear, I did not know what his middle name was. I wasn't trying to make. I didn't even know if you had a multisyllabic middle name.
And you would never have guessed my
I don't
middle
even
name.
know if your first name is actually Ronald. It could be something Ron is short for as well.
It's Ronald.
Okay,
you got that one right.
Yeah, there we go. Ron, when did you start LARPing? And not only when, like I don't just want a date. I guess when did you start LARPing? / how did you step into the realm of LARPing?
So I've been aware of LARP forever. If you play tabletop games, if you go to cons, you're going to know what a LARP is.
Yeah.
Eventually, you're going to see people dressed as vampires and wonder, what the hell are they doing? I started LARPing about 10 or 11 years ago, and the circumstance in which I joined is kind of funny. I watched a documentary on Netflix called Monster Camp. I don't recommend this documentary.
Okay.
After meeting the people who were in it, they are very unhappy with how they were portrayed in it.
Okay.
But through the magic of knowing a little bit about filmmaking, I knew that the documentary was very much trying to create conflict and create a story where there wasn't one, as opposed to show you what this hobby was all about.
Yeah.
But between those moments, there were these really cool quotes and really cool things where people were talking about how, it really helped me come out of my shell. It was great exercise. One of my favorites was a guy was talking, I'm going to paraphrase, but the guy was talking about how as kids, we have so much fun playing and having fun. And at some point we get to an age where we say it's no longer okay. And the difference between LARPers and other adults is LARPers are people who allow themselves to play. Yeah. And that immediately triggered something in me. I, at the time, was about 100 pounds heavier. I didn't go out much. I was just kind of living in my apartment, slowly dying. It's sad, but
that's what was happening.
That was what was happening. I got the idea, well, why don't I try this LARPing thing? I've been a role player for over a decade. I really love like improv theater. why not just give it a shot? Like it's D&D, but walking around. It's exercise. So I talked to my best friend at the time, and he's like, no way. And I'm like, dude, come on. If I don't have somebody go with me, I'll never go. I'll never lose weight. I kind of guilted him into it, honestly. And he was like, fine, I'll go once, but don't you dare ask me to go again after this. I'm going to help you do this because I know it's good for your health. Went, had the time of my life, absolutely enjoyed it, met some of the nicest, most open and welcoming people I'd ever met. The first person I met, she comes up to us, her name's Holly, good friend to this day. She comes up to me and says, hey, by the way, just a heads up, my character is a jerk. But I wanted, before the game started, to say, I am so excited to see new people at the game. My name's Holly. It's really nice to meet you. Took time to like get to know us and said, yeah, so if I'm yelling at you on the battlefield, just know it's all in character. And I'm like, well, I get it. I'm a role player. I'm a GM often. I have to play the bad guy a lot. Had a great time. On the ride home with my best friend, he's like, all right, so we're going again, right? This is what we do now, right? I played a game called Alliance, and it's a national organization, and I went to the Seattle chapter, and it was a lot of fun. It was basically D&D, except instead of talking about fighting dragons, they let me use a stick and hit other nerds with it,
which sounds great.
Who were pretending to be dragons, and that was pretty cool.
That sounds fantastic, and it sounds super cool. So that's 10, 11 years ago. You finally get this opportunity. I like that you had the friend that was like, because I feel like that's what limits LARP. So I feel like most nerds or fandom people that enjoy playing, whether it's games or rather full LARPing or what have you, are sort of unaware / neutral on LARPing, like your average person who doesn't already LARP.
Yeah.
They know what LARPing is, but like that's the level. They know it stands for live action role play. People dress up. There's mechanics or something. It's like hardcore tabletop role playing. That's all that they can really like dive in. And I feel like the majority of those people never try it because either A, they don't have anyone that's willing to go with them for the first time, which is clutch, or B, and this is very key, negativity of fandom. I've not about LARPing specifically, but in general, been one of these people before where it's just like, I don't like that. It seems bad. I'm going to tell the people in my small social circle that it's bad. I'm not going to attack the people that do it, but it's bad. And then everyone's like, I guess it's just not something we're going to do as a group. And it ends up reducing the amount of people that actually try and then inevitably invest in LARPing. Because almost everyone I know that has LARPed, the only reason they don't currently in general is time or access. It has nothing to do with falling out of love of the actual event of participation in or community of LARPing. There are people that definitely have been hurt by the community, and will talk about that kind of stuff later.
Oh yeah,
because you definitely posted online about it.
I have, yeah. No, I love my hobby, but I'm also vocal about the flaws in my hobby, which doesn't always make me the most popular guy. But I'm comfortable with that position in life.
I think that's fair. But yeah, so you get into Alliance. Alliance is a national LARP. I know enough lightly about it that it's just sort of like the spread out LARP. There's discussions in LARPing communities about those national LARPs and their benefits and detriments, much like anything, honestly, that's like kind of more broadcast from a center point, but then everyone knows the rules to versus, or everyone knows the systems to versus something that's kind of like grassroots up community kind of thing.
Well, it's the built-in ability to take your character anywhere.
Yeah.
You can move most places in the country and be a somewhat reasonable drive away from Alliance chapter.
Exactly.
And that's the cool thing. And then your character remains in a database to where you can continue to play them everywhere.
Would you say it's like a chain restaurant though, where even if it's good, it's not nearly as good as many of the mom and pops that you could go to?
That's hard to say. Because because here's the thing. You get games are all run by individuals, and sure, they have an overarching, like they have a set of rules they have to follow, themes they have to follow, but people really make these things their own. it's very hard to gauge what quality you're going to get. It always depends on who has access to what. I mean, like there's a game called Dystopia Rising, which is a zombie survival LARP. You can go to games all across the country. Some are as grassroots as duct taped sticks with really shoddy costuming and just like, we're doing this in our tents at a small campground, to a chapter in California actually managed to get a whole condemned neighborhood where they were like legit looking like they were in a zombie film.
So it's
super high production.
It's less than chain style restaurant and more just like it's more like a style of restaurant.
Everything's a franchise. It's not a chain. It's a franchise.
And it's like, this is Italian food. Some people are going to cook it better. Some people are going to cook it worse. But it's something that almost most people are down for on a pretty regular basis. Very few people hate Italian food, but it might not be everyone's favorite.
Exactly.
And people are going to lots of people will want to branch out from it. So you go from participating in LARPs. How long does it take you from being, I guess, what's the block of time? What's the journey from, okay, we're going next time, right? Like, when are we going back? You and your buddy, when are we going back to when those of us in the current timeline know that you participate in organizing and running and managing LARPs? What's the time frame there, and then what does that journey look like?
So 1 year into LARPing, so I would say I'd played probably 7 or 8 events at that point. There was a opening on the plot team. Now the plot team are basically your group of GMs that make the whole world run. I have a lot of experience as a tabletop GM and was very interested in the mechanics of running a LARP, but had no idea what I was doing. I approached the head of plot, who is now one of my best friends, Matt, who's one of my groomsmen in my wedding, awesome guy. He took a chance on me and said, all right, dude, who's never run a LARP before, tell you what, we're going to kind of give you the rundown. I want you to write a plot and I want you to run it at the next event. And if we dig it and it goes well, welcome to the team. I wrote this kind of one-off plot that could resolve all within the time frame of the 2-day event. And they liked what I did, and so I got involved in the team. I kind of acted as a junior member at first, so I was just writing like little plots here and there. And then I got my opportunity after being on plot for like a year and a half. We were going to start a new campaign. LARPs often have soft resets to new lands, and it's usually portal opens up to New Landia after thing here is resolved is the very common storyline. So I got the chance to write New Landia with my team. And I got to put a lot into the lore, which is my favorite part of running games. So I ended up helping write a campaign called The Valley of Ghosts, which was loved and hated by many. And it was the first low fantasy horror themed alliance campaign.
Ooh, nice.
And we wanted to, I didn't want to just write a fantasy story. I didn't want to write the heroes are always the heroes. So I put a lot of really heavy themes in, like the dangers of colonialism and how the idea of a bunch of adventurers coming to a village and using basically might makes right is probably a negative thing. You are completely throwing off the balance of this world by being here, you super powerful guys who can bring people back from the dead. And that was super well received by some people. Some people felt really uncomfortable and turned off by either the setting or that they didn't get to feel like the hero constantly. And I don't begrudge people, man.
Yes,
I got
people play for different reasons. Some people want that power fantasy to agree, but that heroic fantasy of there's like, I play, tabletop or I LARP so that I can feel like a superhero or like a classic adventurer or like that. And so if they don't get to do that, I could see that being a reasonable statement of a person. That's not why I play tabletop characters and stuff, but that's fair. So you get to write this mixed review, but like complicated themed low fantasy thing, which I love.
And the people who liked it, like really loved it. It's one of those stories that continues on. to this day in the community. And it's really flattering to hear players tell stories of the glowing red eyes in the dark terrifying them and being like, and then all of a sudden there was one with blue eyes and I'm like, that was me.
I was the blue eye.
Yeah, and it was cool. So I think about a year and a half before our run of that campaign, Matt was head of plot. Matt and I were talking like, yeah, like we really dig running this, but like I don't like the restrictions of having to use someone else's world, someone else's monster database, a system that we like. Here's the thing. I have nothing but respect for Alliance. I enjoy Alliance. I don't like its system. It's super overcomplicated and heavily based on old school D&D. So the rules are incredibly hard.
Is it like 2 to 3 era D&D?
Up until recently, yes.
Yeah.
Recently they did a rewrite that like moved it to 3.5 era, but it's still too complicated.
Yeah, it's still pretty complicated, yeah.
So we were like, all right, why don't we just start our own game? We have enough cred that we can start a game and at least have 40 of our friends show up, and that's all we need to make the events work. Let's write the world we want. Let's do it in a genre no one else is running. And let's do it with rules that we've always wanted to see. So we don't want people screaming every time they swing their stick. We want death to be meaningful. We don't want people to be brought back from the dead. Those are all fine, but those make certain themes very low stakes.
Yeah.
So we started working on a game that originally was going to be a sci-fi zombie game, and then a national zombie game opened a chapter in our state, and we're like, well, back to the drawing board. And that's how actually our game that we're going to be wrapping. We were going to wrap up this year, which has been bumped to next year. Spite was born. We were like, there is no hard sci-fi game. So what kind of sci-fi do we like? How do we run a fun game where people get to have meaningful combat? And we kind of settled on something similar to similar to Starship Troopers, because we really like that idea of like humans versus aliens. The aliens are not something you can truly understand right away. They seem more animalistic, but there's a lot more going on there.
Yeah.
And yeah, we just kind of ran the thing we've always wanted to run. And from there it spun off into, well, I mean, why don't I just start a LARP making company and write the weird one shots like a slasher movie LARP? Or how about this experimental, weird, deep thought LARP that people now affectionately refer to and nickname as Ugly Cry the LARP. And that's kind of how the journey went. Now I just kind of produce games for fun.
now you get to produce games for fun. So what I like about that is, and forgive me if I get the timeline wrong. So you spent about a year playing, but you've already been a DM. You've already created campaigns and worlds. And so your brain, of course, as a player is thinking is like, oh, I'd love to know like how this sausage is made. And I'd love to get in there and try and make it myself a little bit. Normal. That's super normal. So you get the opportunity to potentially write something. So for about a year, you're a player. Then for about a year or so, you're on probation or
junior plot, basically.
Junior plot, year and a half. Then you get to write a plot. You do that for about a year and a half or so. Or run that for about a year and a half.
So our game, it ran about 2.5 years. We did Valley of Ghosts.
Yeah, and Valley of Ghosts. So that goes to about, so it's like player, junior writer, proper plot runner, and running that for about 2.5 years. So if you kind of add it all together, about from 5 years from the first time you play it to I'm just going to invent my own shit.
Yeah.
And what I like about that is it's funny because a lot of people in the creative space, or maybe not even in the creative space that they're aware of, which I think LARP players, in my mind, any player, D&D tabletop player, improv comedian, someone that's a musician in a band, no one looks at a band and is like, well, none of those are, there's only, who writes the music? That person? Then the rest of them aren't musicians, right? They're all musicians. They all make the music in the band. And you can tell when only one person makes the music in the band because that band usually breaks up or the members are not consistent. But your average band is the same handful of people. And in LARPing and in tabletop, the players are also, content creators. They're also
Yeah.
they're writers, they're inventors. But what I love about being a kind of like a what I'll call a conceptual maker, so not a physical thing maker necessarily, but like a story writer or a musician, or like something that's performative, or just theater of the mind or creativity without physical product at the end of it, definitively. Is that a lot of players think that it's like, oh, you just have to be like one of those people. And it's like, no, you kind of do it like a job would happen, where you get hired at entry level, you get really good, but you're interested in this thing, this different layer than you does. And then they give you a try, usually, or they like interview you and you seem like you might have the stuff for it. So then they give you a try, and then they gave you a try, and then that worked out, and then you did that layer for a while, and then you're like, well, I want to spin off into my own business at this point, now that I kind of know now I've had a lot of experience with this, and see how I might manage this. And it's very consistent with workplace. So for players of, I guess, LARPs, tabletops, really anything, it's a kind of a heartening story where it's like, yeah, it's 5 years, which is a chunk of time, but it's not the amount of in terms of how long have I been gaming, it's nothing, right? And the barrier of entry isn't like, say, programming a video game, where you have to learn even how to begin writing in the language to do it. It's do the thing that you do to participate, which is play tabletop or play a LARP. Then keep doing that. And if you have even the slightest interest of beginning to plan it, you can start watching YouTube videos, reading up, talking to the people who already do it, and just kind of start doing it and get better at it. And then, that. So,
I mean, the number one piece of advice when people come up to me, they go like, well, how do I start my first LARP? And I'm like, have you staffed a LARP for 2 or 3 years yet? If the answer is no, then go find a LARP that'll put you on staff for 2 or 3 years. Don't try, because I've seen people do the 0 to LARP creator, and the games don't always function, and they don't always work. And there's always a bunch of pitfalls that could have so easily been avoided with a little bit of experience.
Yeah, definitely work within the group that you play in, or within a group you're comfortable with, where you're not the person in charge first. You're a person watching the person in charge and working with / for them, so that you can watch what that happens and live in the experience. And maybe that's enough. Like in the case of, I think a lot of people are like this, but in your case, you're like, I like Alliance, but there was rules and there were monsters. There were things I wanted to do with it that I couldn't do. So I had to move on. But for some people, they might be like, nope, this is it. This is where I want to be. Like, I will write plot for this, and then that's it. And that's fine. That's 100% good.
Yeah, nothing wrong with it. And one thing I wanted to really clarify, because something you brought up, like a band being all the members. Yes, I write a lot of stuff. I make a lot of games. But one thing I think people don't fully understand about me is, like, I'm the crappiest Avenger. I'm the one with like no powers, can barely do anything. My only strong quality is I'm incredibly good at assembling the Avengers. I can put together people with superpowers that can make my games run very easy. So I can write my, 30 pages of lore or whatever, and write my little stories and tell them. And then I have, 20 people around me that make the game actually run.
That do the game.
Yeah, when I have anxiety about talking to the site, I have somebody that does that for me. When I don't have time to do check-in because I'm organizing, getting something else ready, I have somebody that does that for me.
Yeah.
And they're all awesome volunteers and just as much a part of making games run, which is something that infuriates me, because I'm typically the face guy for my LARPs.
Yeah.
I do a lot of the online posting. That's the big thing is social media presence. When you're the guy doing a lot of it, people always assume, oh, well, Spite is Ron's game. It really isn't. Spite is much more my plot, at this point especially, is much more my plot team's game, was always half Matt's game. And I remember it broke my heart when somebody asked, who's that guy? Like, the guy who wrote all the rules and helped me write the lore. Like, my partner in this whole thing, the only reason this is a real game is his 15 years of experience helping guide me through all the pitfalls while I do the whole.
Otherwise,
it'd be cool if we had super soldiers.
Otherwise, it'd just be a mess. It'd be a tragic mess. No, I do love that. All right, so now I have now that we have like your kind of full experience, sort of like or like how you got to running Spite. The fact that I love that you. Again, it didn't happen this year, but I recall you posting about wrapping up like the impact of it's like this was a baby that I helped create and it is aged and I think it's done. I think it's time to put a close on this and move on to something else. So let's get into the meat and potatoes. So it's let's I know LARPs can happen in different time lengths and in different ways, and some systems are better set up for, all right, this is for, the long part of a day versus we can do this for 2 days or like a long weekend and stuff like that. But let's go with weekend LARPs because I think that's my bread and butter. It's also I think commonsensically you could, again, if you're a tabletop player or even a video game player, be like, well, what would an 8-hour LARP look like? Well, you could probably figure that out based off the fact that it's like, well, everyone would get together at like, I don't know, like 2, and then they'd all, kind of chit chat for a little bit. The game would start. They'd LARP to a certain time. Maybe there's a break. Maybe there's not. It's unclear. But it'd just be like game night of any other kind of game night, except with the LARP functionality of it. But a weekend LARP is not something that a lot of, say, tabletoppers, board gamers, or video gamers have like a parallel to that's a common theme in their gaming spaces. So describe to me if you were a player going to a weekend LARP, not as a like all the mess of stress that organizing one is. But if you're a player going to a weekend LARP, a new player, what's that gonna look like for them?
So you'll arrive on site, you'll check in, you'll get the place you're going to sleep, you'll figure all the like logistics of where I'm going to exist in this space taken care of.
Yeah.
There's usually a opening announcements where they'll go, hey, don't use the last stall in the girls' bathroom because it's broken. They go over all the mechanical stuff of what's going to go on. Games, in my opinion, should have a new player orientation. So if you're brand new, you'll get a rundown of the rules. You'll get a rundown of, hey, what questions do you have? There'll be people available. And the cool thing about LARPs is LARPs have the best cheerleaders for players. They will straight up talk someone's ear off. So I don't have to go out and sit with every new player because I'm about to entertain 150 people. I can't sit with everybody. I'd love to, but I can't. Everybody is eager to sit with that new person and show them the ropes. Once the game begins, you're going to get into character and you're going to basically explore the world. And if the LARP runners have done their job well enough, there will be a paced schedule of things that you're not going to know are going to happen, where there's content always going out. So it may be some random guy who limps into town covered in blood. Well, now as a player character, I have to decide, am I going to go interact with the guy covered in blood limping into town? That probably means there's some juicy plot there. So it might be a good idea to go interact with that. I hear screaming in the night. Most sane people would go, all right, I'm going to go lock my doors. And there are those LARPs for people who like that hardcore realism. But for a new player-friendly LARP, you're going to run towards the screaming. And you're going to get in a fight.
Where's the action? That direction? All right.
Yeah, so you get kind of an introduction. You get some action for the first night. You have a meal. You stay up talking stories all night with players who are so excited to tell you everything about their character's backstory, even if it seems a little awkward. It's like, well, I asked where the bathroom is, but thank you for telling me about the 7 generations of your family and the sword oath you took 200 years ago. But I still have to pee.
So where's that again?
Then in the morning, you're going to wake up, and meals are a really good time to get to know people. So meals are usually in game. You're going to eat breakfast with people and talk, and that's a good time for plot to have things come in and kind of drop information. So plot teams will come up with interesting ways to disseminate information. A lot of times that's through sending in NPCs, coming in themselves as NPCs, and like having that town gossip start, like, oh, did you hear about the kobolds in the woods, and or for like spite, it's like, yeah, we heard that at 0900 there's supposed to be a supply drop, but we're really worried because the zone's hot. And that gives people an idea of, oh, there's some stuff going on. Then you go get up to no good for a good chunk of the day. And eventually there's usually some big fight that draws the whole town together to do the thing. And hopefully if the plot team's doing their job, you'll get involved in the story of why that big fight's happening and what the resolution needs to be. Usually by Saturday night, there's a resolution to the main story, and into Sunday morning, afternoon, when we usually call off around noon for most games because you have to clean up and get the hell out. That's the time where it's the wind down and I really wanted to talk to this person's character. Well, I'm going to go find him and kind of do that. It's the catching up on all the last minute things before you have to close the game. One thing LARPers will always say, and I think it's very important to say to new people, is that a big portion of LARPing is making your own fun.
Yeah.
And I know that sounds a little weird to some gamers, particularly people who've only ever played video games where all the fun is provided for you. But think about times you've played a video game and you've been like, I wonder if I could climb that mountain. I know that has nothing to do with what I'm supposed to be doing right now, but I want to see if I could just climb.
Yeah, sandbox games are absolutely, that's
speed running. That's making your own fun.
I think it's always funny because making your own fun is a consistent theme in human experience that again, film, definitely that's not, it's a one way.
Yeah.
Games is a participatory primary storyteller, secondary, very secondary depending on the game, player storyteller. But when you get to all right, so let's say you're sitting around the table, you're playing a board game. Let's say it's with your family. It's Monopoly, right? Contentious board game, potentially. But whatever. It's a classic board game. It's not anything you're excited. It's not even Catan, right? We're going super classic board games.
Right.
And everything. You can choose to sit there, half pay attention, browse your phone, and then go when it's your turn and let the mechanic happen. And that might be fine. That might not bore you. But you make a memory if you decide to put things away and engage with the people that you have available to you to engage with. And that is true that is every parent to every middle school child on the planet, right? Is if you just participate, if you put down whatever's making you resistant to this, if it's not a traumatizing thing or it's not a real emotional conflict, but it's more of a initial interest, or a predilection to kind of shy away from something that doesn't snag you immediately as something you're really enthralled by. If you just lean in, you'll probably have a better time, because that's how human minds work, is that you can decide to try and make this fun for yourself. And that will always be true of social interaction in any case, or of things that you do to entertain yourself. And so LARP is a kind of a perfect example. It's no one wants an improv member of an improv group who doesn't yes and. Right? They're not going to have fun. The improv group's going to have less fun.
It's like playing Skyrim and standing in the middle of town and wondering why nothing's happening.
Yeah, right? You got to go to places.
Yeah, you've got to go. And that's the thing about LARP that confuses a lot of people at first, is you physically have to go do things. You have to go look for things. Just like I said, using Skyrim again as an example, you have to go to the tomb to have the fun tomb adventure.
Yeah, yeah. And so you just go. And then when you go there, there's going to be somebody, again, like you say, there's NPCs, there's plot developers playing NPCs. There's things that are all right, now that you're here, go that way. Now that you're here, here's a mystery for you to figure out. Or now that you're here, this is what's happening. Will you help us stop it from happening? And then you're important suddenly. You're not taking all of the steps. You're just taking a couple of the steps. And then someone's handing you a glass of plot, and then you splash that in your face, and then you run a few more steps, and then here's some more plot splashed in your face, and then you fight a dragon, and then you run a few more steps, and you're like, this is a weird marathon.
It is. It's a weird marathon.
But so new player, they're going to stay overnight. They're going to have Friday night and Saturday night. They're going to get to go back home Sunday after spending a weekend sort of immersed in this world. Is there, have you played a lot of like, all right, it's Saturday and we're going to do this thing Saturday, and then it wraps up at like anywhere between 11 o'clock and like 2 a.m, where it's just like a one day thing? I know some World of Darkness LARPs are very like that, where they have like one day events in a building and then that's it kind of thing.
No. I really meant it when I said weekend LARPs are my bread and butter. I have done a few convention LARPs, which are similarly structured because they only run for 1 to 3 hours. And those are fun, but like my jam, you used a word that is overused in the LARP community to the point that it is absolutely meaningless, which sucks because it's the thing I love about LARPing, but immersion.
Immersion.
I go to LARP because I like to immerse myself in a world. I want to, like, if I'm playing a character, I want to be that character. I don't want to talk about my Xbox Live account. I don't want to talk about my Steam handle. I don't want to talk about what tabletop games I play. I'll do that with you at an appropriate time, but for the most part, when I'm at a LARP, I'm there to play whoever I happen to be that weekend. As long as it's not to the detriment of someone else. That's kind of my hard line is, sure, I want to be super in character, but if my character is causing you to out of game have a bad time, that's when I'm like,
please just let me know. But so like there's no reason you can't change exactly how you play your character, of course, to make sure everybody's having fun, but that's human courtesy. That's just being a human, recognizing that everyone wants to have fun. You mentioned as well that like the first LARP you went to with, I believe their name was Holly. It was very clear right at the beginning. It's like, my character is very mean. I am not. I'm letting you know that is in character. Feel like I'm excited you're here, kind of thing. Excited everyone's here, and so it's again, that's not inconsistent or abnormal. So that gives me another couple weird questions. All right, in your experience, I know you can't speak to the whole of it. In your experience, let's say I'm new, I want to get into LARPing, and I don't have a Ron who is going to escort me around and hold my little baby hand.
Oh my god, I just signed up for an escort quest in real life, didn't I?
You kind of did. You kind of did.
Okay, sorry.
I'm just going to wander into all of the fires. What are you doing? There's clearly zombies that direction. What?
Adventurer, please help me. You're supposed to be an adventurer too.
LARP. I love the idea of you being like, this is the worst escort quest. How long? Oh God, it's only 8 p.m. on Friday. God damn it. This is only going to get worse. Assuming I don't have a person to escort me around that's very familiar to introduce and everything like that, let's say I am bold enough to want to get into a LARP and be the driving factor for getting into one, whether or not I invite another person who doesn't LARP as well. What, in your experience, is there a lot you need to bring? Is there a lot you need to... I mean, obviously, if you're going to be staying a couple nights, you need to bring the things you need to live. Like, what would you recommend people do if they're thinking about that?
So first off, establish what kind of game you want to play, and then look for one. Your best bet is a fantasy game, because those are the most common LARPs. Once you find a game that seems interesting to you, absolutely go onto their social media. And if you're not a social media person, at least email them, because most games have a new player representative who is more than happy to walk you through all the steps and hold your hand. You don't need to don't ever think you need to walk into the game like a master of the rules, unless that's like some written policy of the game. Most of the time, players are super cool about helping you learn, getting you into the game, because you, a new person, usually means 5 more new people. If you aren't somebody's friend already and you're just a brand new person, like I just randomly showed up, I ended up bringing, like, at one point my crew was 12 people who'd never LARPed before, that I started bringing with me to games because I'm an all new friend base to start dragging people into this hobby.
Yeah, exactly.
Get on the social media, ask questions, but for actually bringing stuff, it's going to depend on the game. Usually your loadout is going to be some type of weapon, some type of costume. If you can afford it, a change of costume, just because you get grimy and dirty. Definitely wear underlayers. You're going to bring sleeping bag. Find out if food is offered and is part of the ticket price. Some games have communal food that's all part of the ticket price. Some games you're required to bring your own stuff and throw it in a big walk-in fridge for the weekend. Just do your research, reach out, and they will give you a list of things. Each LARP kind of has their own Google Doc of checklist stuff you need to bring.
Yeah. So you're looking at that, you go in, and that's the thing. There's no reason. I don't think there's any reason, unless you are in a situation where you don't have access to this or you really can't convince anything. I don't think if you're new to LARPing that you should ever really go solo. If you're new, why not? Most people likely have a friend. You had to use guilt, but most people likely have a friend that'll be like, yeah, you know what? Let's just do it. Let's go. It's an hour drive and then we're there and we'll just, knock it out this weekend, see if we like it. So go with someone that makes you more comfortable so that you can definitively know someone else there will have as little experience as you. You can feel a little safe. And then when the community is welcoming, as almost all gaming communities are generally welcoming, and they want to bring more people into their little niche corner of the world, you'll be able to become more comfortable. And then if that person isn't like your closest friend, and maybe it's not really their thing, it's fine, because you're already in the headspace of, well, I want to go back. I want to see these people again. I want to do that. Assuming you like LARPing. If you don't like LARPing, it's so weird to me to think that someone could LARP for a while and actually not like it.
There have been some cases like that, but it's generally something really terrible happened because some people are awful, or it's like they were playing for the wrong reasons, which is usually I'm dating somebody who's playing this game, and that's the only reason I'm here, or it's I'm one of those people that likes to try new things all the time, and I'm gonna stick with it to see if I like it, and then they end up leaving. I mean, because there's folks we've had that have come in and been like, yeah, this is neat, but like, I don't know, I think I'll just go back to doing zombie fun runs.
Yeah,
you know, and that's totally cool. It's just kind of like trying out the waters. I recommend anybody to if any of this sounds like fun to you, to at least give it a shot. The worst thing that's going to happen is you're going to waste a weekend and a little bit of money.
Yeah.
And a lot of games will allow you to come in and be like an NPC where you get to play a bunch of roles, learn the rules. They provide the costumes for you. A lot of times they even provide you food. Like my game Spite, if you come NPC for us, you don't pay for the game. We provide you snacks. We give you all your costumes, all your weapons. We give you your roles, and we teach you the game. It's a good way for people to get started, and it's a great way to bring people in.
See, yeah, that is a great way, because it means that it's like, do you like the kind of camping and camaraderie aspect of this, but you're not super comfortable being in control of your own fate during it, which is an ask. Again, you have to make your own fun. If someone's telling you, play this role, you still have to make your own fun, but they've given you, basically a big hints at how to get away with it. They've given, it's more video gamey that way, right? Like almost. And I like that a lot.
And especially when you tell somebody who, like, a lot of times NPCs are friends who either didn't have the money or weren't sure yet, are brought by friends who are hardcore players in the game.
Yeah.
And they kind of drop them in NPC camp knowing we'll take care of them. And I can't tell you how many times I've seen someone's face light up when I go, hey, who brought you? You want to go kill him?
And they're like,
of course. Are you serious?
100%.
And I'm like, yes.
Who doesn't want to murder your friends? Yeah. In a fantasy way.
In a safe way with absolutely no consequences in the real world.
Consequences in the real world. So let's. I'm gonna try and swing it up. I have no idea how long we've been recording.
We should probably wrap it up in like 10 minutes or so.
Okay. So I want to hit this mark because we've talked about it. We're talking about the positive things here. And LARP is kind of like a positive place and positive, but there are some things, and you yourself have talked about them, and I think it's only appropriate in this kind of a longer form conversation to acknowledge that part of it, and sort of I'll frame it this way. What are some of the things that you feel may turn off different groups of people that aren't based in the pure raw mechanics of the game or the pure raw function of the game? Turn off let me rephrase, the ideal of the game, right? Some people might be turned off by the idea of pretending to be someone and play,
Sure,
obviously. But what I'm talking about is, what are some of the experiences you've had or heard of that might turn off specific groups of people? And how do you feel like you're either seeing or would like to see different organizations, games, and stuff like that correct that, so there's less of those incidental or like problems or things that create conflict? In a much simpler way, what's some racist and sexist and terrible shit? And it doesn't have to be like the worst stuff, but like what's some stuff that's happening that's making people be like oogie in a situation that doesn't have to be there?
So I guess to start, I would say anything that you've heard about happening at a con, in the music scene, in tabletop scene, whatever, any horror story you've heard has happened at LARP. I mean, when you get a bunch of people together who feel or are societal outcasts, like being a gamer, there's a lot of drive to be very accepting of everyone. And in the drive to be very accepting of everyone, sometimes we accept behaviors that we really, really shouldn't. And I'll get into a few of those. LARP has a racism problem. I have no problem saying that. I myself have experienced things, even as a white passing person of color. It's even harder for people who don't have, white cis dude armor like I do. Mm-hmm. And frankly, there are some things in the LARP community that are dated. For instance, some games still cling to having the racial slur of Romani people be a playable fantasy race. Which was a thing in D&D.
You mean
in
classic the Vistani?
Yeah, like it, and it's
it's common Western fantasy trope to have that.
They use the G word constantly, and it's a thing that really does bother some people, and it doesn't bother others. I've had Romani people be like, I don't care. But I've also heard people say this really harms my people in our culture. So it's one of those things that I think you have to measure harm and be like, all right, like this is harming people. All I have to do is stop doing it or change it, and it would be better. Like, do that. Like with dark elves, that's always been a thing where you have, and this is the thing I think people miss, is it's not just the aspect of dark elves play dangerously close to minstrel blackface in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. There's also the fact that almost universally drow, who are all dark-skinned individuals, are inherently evil.
Yeah, they're evil by design.
Orcs, the green-skinned savages.
Yeah.
It's like everybody who has a skin tone, an enforced darker skin tone via makeup, is oftentimes either portrayed as a savage or an evil person. And like, I don't know how you can't see that as problematic.
Yeah, and like you said, with the G word, you can just change some shit, and then you fix the problem. It's not like that isn't an option. This is storytelling. Just adjust the story. Yeah. If you're being, if your story had respectful representation of like Romani culture and stuff like that, Roma culture, then you'd be fine. and no one would have a problem with that, would they?
Yeah, and I think the infuriating part, and I'll steal a fun term from a mutual friend. Oh, the cacacity of some of the people out there.
The cacacity of it.
It genuinely.
Thank you, Shubs.
Thanks, Shubs. It turns into one of those things where you see people who you know are well-meaning, and they're like, I just want to play the game I've always played. I don't hate black people. I have black friends. I don't understand why I'm wearing jet black makeup. Why is it that big of a deal? Well, it hurts people. Yeah, but it shouldn't. Okay, cool. I'm glad you have that opinion, Chet. But perhaps if it's hurting people, we could just not. We could have the characters have purple skin. God forbid we do something a little bit different than what's always been the stock
if
standard.
If they're an
norm.
Underground race, maybe fully white skin because
exactly
and that
subterranean. Anybody?
Subterranean equals lighter skin. That's normal. There's no reason that wouldn't have happened.
And the cool thing is
we mark them black because they're evil. That's cool, but like every race that you have that's dark is kind of evil.
And like there was a reason why they did stuff like that in old school fiction because they were kind of racist, or a lot racist depending on where you're going with it.
It's the black hat problem in general, right? Like the concept. There's much deeper conversations about how this is pervasive in Western fiction, and it's not so much that black being the night and therefore unknown and shadows isn't inherently something that triggers something in the human condition, but you have to be cautious about taking that into things like skin tone or just aesthetic in general and making that something there. So LARPing racism problem. What about like, again, this is in your experience. You can't speak as an expert for LARPs across the country or in other countries and stuff like that. What about, and then obviously, do you feel like there's a like a sexism problem in LARPing?
Yeah. I mean, and just the fact that I've had female friends run out of LARPs because they've been, particularly POC women, be fetishized and chased after, and that's the problem when you get into these nerd communities, especially nerd communities that are now opening up more and more and more to other than just the old boys club. Now we have games where I play games where there are more women than men, and that is amazing, and that's super cool. But there's still this like pervasive thing that people are really looking for dates when they go to these things, and you can't stop trying to date everybody you LARP. Like, I get it. Like, you may get a connection out of game and you meet up for coffee sometime. Great, that's cool. Do the thing. But like, when your character is based entirely upon hitting on women aggressively, all you're doing is using your character to excuse shitty behavior because you're trying to get laid. Let's be very frank. And that's the really common thing is my character is super flirtatious and I'm just playing my character. So much shitty so much shitty behavior gets excused by I'm just playing my character. Well, maybe play less of an asshole character that makes people out of game uncomfortable. Don't do that.
Yeah, it's weird. I didn't really think about that because LARPing is so much about player interaction directly and less so than, say, like a tabletop. You're going to have lots of player interaction, hopefully. Good tabletops too. But like a D&D section, 9 times out of 10, most of the flirting that happens on the table is between the DM and whatever player character is happening because the DM is playing everyone else. And so that's fine because most DMs, unless they're particularly specifically uncomfortable with it or unless the players are uncomfortable with it, understand that that's just going to come up. So if you're playing like, I suppose the comparative, I never really thought about that. The classic bard archetype, right? The I want to try and sleep with everything. At a tabletop session, if you're playing it and your DM and you are good with it, you're not hurting it. You can be as crappy of a person as possible, and it's fine because you're doing it to a DM, and there's no undertone there usually between that. But I guess I've heard the occasional story. I've heard a lot of stories actually about when a like say it's a majoritively group of men that look like myself I guess, and or variations of the stereotypes applied to the nerd community that usually include just white dudes.
You actually shape your beard, so you're not exactly fitting the stereotype.
I did literally an hour before I got here. Most of the time, full neck beard, but I realized I would be on the camera again for the first time.
Oh
in a
yeah,
while.
I shaved 2 hours ago too.
Yeah, right. I'm a mess. I don't know why my partner puts up with me, but they, I guess I have heard stories of when a young woman enters a table of mostly young men and they're attracted to women, that their players will get like real kind of skeevy toward them, or like a player will get, and they'll be like, it's in character. So I suppose I've just never experienced that because I've been lucky and only been at games where everyone's like, I didn't play D&D to fuck. Like if you're into the erotic fictional side of that, and that's what the group dynamic is, 100% cool. If everybody's down with it, of course. But like, I would argue most tabletop games aren't generally filled with people that are looking to fulfill sex fantasies. It's fun to joke about. It's fun to have as an aspect of the campaign. But like, the campaign isn't American Pie, the fantasy campaign of can we have sex before we graduate from high school. It's almost always like, kill the lich or kill the thing, defeat the bad guy, and the other stuff is sort of byblows. But so definitely sexism problems
and some predatory behavior that just grosses me out.
I don't like that excuse. That bothers me that people use. Oh, my character is that way. I'm like,
and there's a lot of like
shade from
following people, young girls and stuff, and it's gross. It bothers me, and it's one of the things I really hate about my hobby. That and the racism issue, and the thing about it is that despite these things, and it's probably a good chunk of my own privilege, I still attend and I still try to make things better.
Yeah.
And I know, at least in how I'm trying to approach the LARP community, is I have a zero tolerance policy. You fuck around at one of my games, you're gone. I have no qualms with throwing you out, and I have no qualms with making sure other games throw you out. Frankly, I don't want predators in our community, and I will ruin you if you come to my community. Mm-hmm. Like, I know I just got real heavy there for a second, but frankly, it's good. It's I want these things to be safe spaces because they have been. I want them to be as safe of a space for everyone as it has been for me looking the way I do.
Yeah,
and I think that's only fair. And I want these games to be just about playing and having fun. And some people make it about something else, and that bugs me to no end. And I want to get rid of those bad actors in my community. And I guess the best way I can do that is by writing and running my own games and basically curating my community. It's
creating a space and then attracting people maybe that were worried about that kind of thing to that space, letting them know. I think that, obviously I think it needs to be a top-down decision in any game running to just have those no tolerance policies. But I also feel like the more people that do that, the less people will go to a LARP and maybe have a bad experience and then walk away from the entire function of it, the entire genre of it, and instead be like, I went to this and it was terrible. There's gotta be ones that aren't that way, right? And then having the more people that take action against it, have different players, maybe different players that, look like more like this, person that was attacked, or person that was skeeved out, or person that had to deal with racist shit or something, and being like, oh no, I'm in this one, and it's totally like fully aware that that's part of the LARP community and does not allow it in this game. So if you want to go to a LARP game, come to this game. And the more that happens, and unfortunately that does have to happen from the top down to move it quickly. Because you can't just depend. It's not like other spaces where it's as easy. A tabletop game can be created by essentially 2 at minimum, but like a D&D campaign, usually 3 or 4 people is all you need to participate, and you got a D&D campaign happening. So the barrier of creating your own space for that is a lot simpler than creating a LARP space.
Well, especially a big LARP. But there's a really cool line. Somebody said that first, if you ever want to know what LARP is, go check out the there's a documentary. Oh my gosh, why is it slipping my brain right now? That this is so bad. Treasure Trapped. It's set over in Europe, but it is the best LARP documentary I've ever had. Full disclosure, I was brought to a free screening of it by the creators. I've met the creators, wonderful people. And frankly, it's my go-to. There's a line in there about LARPing that they said, they were talking about European LARPing, and they said, for us, LARPing can be as simple as two people standing on a balcony having a scene about them breaking up.
That's so good.
And that opened my eyes
that's
to
just
LARPing.
Improv. That's classic improv theater right there.
And for me, that changed my design philosophies, because I always designed for such a big audience that I started looking at the micro LARPs and some of the cool things.
Like the intimate scenes?
Yeah, I had a buddy who told me about one of the coolest LARPs. His name is Sindre, was a exchange student at the UW who joined our scene and started telling us about some of the cool LARPs he was at. My favorite one he told me about was... they had this game where it was a day game, so it was a couple hours, and everybody was given a random object from a secondhand store that they put in their lap. And they played that object. And they were basically sitting in a circle telling their stories about how hard it was to be a toaster that kept getting passed up for newer, nicer toasters. And people were in tears about the toaster story, or the little doll that had been abandoned by several children over and over and over again, and is my whole life nothing but abandonment.
Yeah.
And it became this really healing, cool role-playing experience, pretending to be a toaster. Like...
like that is super cool. I guess last bit, because I wanted to ask about it, since it's the last category of demographic oppression that is common in different scenes. What about the kind of like the LGBTQ spaces? Do you see resistance there, or do you see acceptance there? Obviously, you get to kind of guide Spite, so I assume that that's pretty welcoming. But do you see the same kind of problems that happen with sexism and racism, or do you feel like it approaches it differently? Obviously, it can also intersect, of course.
I am not an expert on this one, but from my experience and from talking to many friends in the community, it seems to be a safer space for them than other communities they've been involved in. I've had people say, like even people who are very privileged, say things like, the first time I met an actual trans person was at a LARP, and it was really educational and eye-opening to get to meet people. And so I think the LGBTQ plus community really does get welcomed into LARPing a lot more. There is always problems. There's always that guy. There's always games that allow that guy to keep playing, even though, like, wow, this person's just sharing white supremacist memes. That's cool that you're still letting that person at your game. By the way, they're not fucking welcome in my house. It's my living room. I can write this game, but it's my living room. I don't want to hang out with you. You're not going to be in my living room. But it's there are still struggles. Just like any sort of thing, there's going to be people with shitty opinions, and you're going to get people who dead name people. You're going to have people who misgender people, and those are always problems. And I think they're more a reflection of societal problems. But at least from my experience in the liberal Pacific Northwest, speaking with my queer friends, it seems to be a more accepting place for them. And I think that's an awesome thing to hear. Yeah. Also, I wanted to say, just kind of in response also to what we were before talking about, I'm also seeing a lot of change right now. And I'm seeing things like Alliance no longer using that race I was talking about. They've changed locally all the dark elf makeup. Now you're not allowed to wear blackface anymore.
Yay.
That's a thing now.
Good.
There are games that are instituting less Eurocentric settings. There's a game that has a historical setting who for a long time was like, and for some good reasons, like, we don't want like white samurais, which was one of their reasons to dodge it. But also it was very Eurocentric to the point where POC players would come in and be like, can I play my culture? And they're like, nope.
Yeah.
And it's like, but
so it was exclusionary. It was
but you have fantasy creatures in this historical setting.
Yeah, can I be here?
Can I come through a portal from the magic that's in the world?
Yeah, maybe.
But yeah, it's cool to see games taking those steps, and I'll acknowledge who they are. Seattle Alliance, Oregon are taking steps to do better. Shadow Accord is a old World of Darkness, Dark Ages game that's taking a lot of steps to do better. And it's so cool to see people step up, admit that their leadership is very white, and reaching out into the community to have coordinators and do training. Like Alliance Oregon is doing actual training on how to better work with other communities besides all the white kids who run it. They've brought on a POC staff member to help coordinate these things and guide some of the decisions that were previously made by mostly a panel of white people.
Yep, it's that's good to hear, and it makes sense. I feel like you mentioned kind of early on, as these historically kind of, I don't want to use this word, isolated. Instead of or as these sort of isolated, more monolithic communities of essentially white dudes, fandoms, LARPs, where it wasn't really, let me rephrase, it wasn't really ever fully monolithic, but like as these historically like predominantly spaces where the people in control, or the people managing things, or the people promoting things, or the people with disposable income to invest in things and stuff like that tended to be, white males, oftentimes straight white males. As these things are opening up to more demographics, it makes some sense that like that hit, and then a bunch of problems were surfaced where it was like, what are you doing in this space right now?
Wow, Chad's really racist. We just kind of didn't notice because we never really challenged him on anything. The second we said, hey, can we not have blackface? He was like, no, we will have blackface. You are ruining my immersion.
I'm dressed as a drow.
And it's like, dude,
calm down.
Are we just going to sit here and watch this hate crime?
And so it makes sense that at this point, it needs to be an active thing. That it's happening now. It's good to hear that it's happening now, and it should be happening now, because we're still in a period of time, though. Love you, Gen Z. You're pretty much past it, and I love to see it. We're pretty much in a period of time. We're still in a period of time where very many things and fandoms and cultures, especially depending on where you live in the United States, are still perceived the way they were in the 90s and back. And there are people still untangling themselves from that. So LARPing, Dungeons and Dragons, Magic the Gathering, video game, like heavy gaming, for millennials, or for Gen Xers and older millennials, it was, why are you watching Twitch streams? What is Vine? And why do you have it so much, for that kind of thing. And so we still have that sort of cultural pushback on certain things that the main culture doesn't heavily invest in, the main popular culture doesn't heavily invest in, or have access to to see it, and understand it. So, seeing that open up to bigger and kind of redesign and be like, all things being fair, this wouldn't just be a bunch of straight white dudes running around. This would be everybody. Like, why doesn't it happen to be? Well, there's a lot of explanations, but some of them are, when those people would go into those spaces, shit would be problematic and they'd be shut out. And now we're finally at the point where it's like, no, that's not it. No, stop it. Mm-hmm. We're done with that era. And then the reason I shouted out Gen Z is because I just don't see that. Very young people don't seem to have a concept of what is or is not geeky or niche. Maybe it's because they've never lived without high speed. So in their mind, there's like, there's a category for everything. What do you mean furries is a fringe fetish? There's furries goddamn everywhere. It's like 50%.
Comic books are weird. The biggest movies in the world are comic book
I've
movies.
never known a world that didn't have X-Men in it, because the oldest of it was 24, which means your ass was born in 1996 when the X-Men animated series was airing on Saturday mornings happily, and you were 4 when the first movie came out. So Gen Z, in their minds, like Lord of the Rings fandom, fantasy, all of this is just parts of culture. There are people that like it and don't, just like people like football and don't, just like people like home and garden television network and don't. Like it's all just interests. And so quickly, in about another 5-10 years, all of my nerdcore rap will be completely irrelevant, because they'll be like, what do you mean nerdcore? It's just rapping about video games. Like, there's 8,000 YouTube channels that do that. That's normal. But yeah, and so it's good to see it. I'm glad to hear it. It needs to continue to change, continue to welcome different people, because you'll get better games that way. 100% of the time, every time, you'll get better games the more people that you have and the more different those people are. Except for racists. You don't need to include that category of people.
I just don't want to include terrible people in my games anymore.
Yeah,
it's not okay. Yeah, if you guys want to check out LARPing, it's a lot of fun. It really is. If you're in the Pacific Northwest, I would happily point you to a game. If you want to hit us up through our site or through Leota Role-Playing, which is my core site where I post all the different games I'm running and stuff. I'm not even going to necessarily direct you to one of my things. I am happy to point people to other games, because there's a lot. We in the Pacific Northwest have this overabundance of LARP that is both awesome and detrimental at the same time, because people are competing for sites, and and it's like it's a good problem to have, that there's so much variety, but like there really is only a couple thousand LARPers in the area, and you can only spread that out amongst so many games before people have to make hard decisions.
You're the
on
restaurant
weekends.
industry again. To tie it back to my food analogy early on. Yep.
But yeah, it's a lot of fun. It does have its problems, like any geek hobby. But it's a lot. I think some of those old stereotypes. Sure, lightning bolt guy. People make fun of the YouTube video. But to be fair, I have thrown lightning bolts in a similar manner at a game. I just do it in a nicer costume. And to crap on somebody for having a low budget, I mean, there's all sorts of problematic stuff in that and of itself.
We've all realized early internet, Star Wars kid internet, might not have been the most positive place. That ruined lives and destroyed people for simply having fun doing what they wanted to do.
And that's the cool thing about LARPing, is really it's having fun doing what you want to do. It's allowing yourself to play again. Like I said, hit me up if you ever want to know about LARPing and want a suggestion. I am in a very cool position where I know LARP runners across the whole country and several in Europe. So I may even be able to help a little bit internationally, but if you're in the US or Canada, I can probably point you to a game.
Also, just because I wanted to mention them, because they're a thing that I didn't know existed a year ago, and I know now that they exist. If you have children, if you're wondering if there's a way to, kind of bring kids into LARPing and everything, there are, depending on which coast you're at, multiple LARP camps that you can send your kids to, because LARPers want to get kids into LARPing, because it turns out that if you LARP as a kid, you're more likely to do it as a teenager, as an adult. We've all, as nerds, seen it at conventions. We've seen it in gaming spaces. If you grow up doing something, you're just going to keep doing it.
Alliance is 8 years old and up.
Yeah. So you can bring them to a game, but if you want to bring them to a more like very specifically youth-focused thing, LARP camps exist. Literally type in LARP camps in Google and your state or state near you, and they will exist. And there'll be day camps. There's even one, I think, over or in the California area that's like a sleepaway camp where people can be there for like 2-3 weeks at a time, which is like, if you had told a 9-year-old me, it's like, hey, do you want to play pretend at camp for 2 to 3 weeks straight? I would have been like, yeah, that sounds amazing.
Shows the horror movie nerd in me when you say sleepaway camp. I'm like, oh, like the horror movie? I actually ran the slasher movie LARP once.
Sleepaway camp. But yeah. So go check that out. Where would they check your LARPs out again, Ron? Let's do some plugs on the exit here.
So I belong to 3 organizations. There is spitelarp.com, which is wrapping up its final game next year. We want to run it in such a way that if that is your first and last game of Spite, you still will have fun. I also do a one-shot company called Ostari Games, ostarigames.org. That's Ostari. That's one I do with my partners, Jimmy and Kirsten, my business partners. They are awesome. It's all kind of experimental one-shots, so kind of more like if you're like a theater nerd, those games are perfect for you. Low combat, high concept stuff. Also, if you just want the one-stop shop where I talk about the podcast and also all my LARPing and tabletop stuff, Leota Role-Playing. You can look me up on Facebook at Leota Role-Playing. I also independently produce one game a year I'll pull a team together. And the next one I'm running, hopefully, fingers crossed, will be early next year. I'll be running Butcher Lake 2, which is the sequel to my first slasher movie LARP. You do not need to have played the first game because everyone died at the first game. It was the 80s slasher movie LARP. Everyone died. And this next one will be Butcher Lake 2, 90s edition.
Yeah. You can find all those links as well on the YouTube videos. If you're listening to this on podcast, if you go to Dying of Exposure and you go to the description of any of the roles we play YouTube videos, it's there in the description of everyone. What Ron just mentioned. If you want help with LARPing, don't come to me. I haven't done it yet. I haven't really done it yet. I'm gonna do it. I promise you, next spring, summer, fall, like LARP season, I am going to gratefully have Ron take me to a LARP, and I'm going to, I don't know if I'll be a player or if I'll be an NPC. NPC seems like the easier path, and I'm a very lazy person.
Oh, no. No.
So,
I'm going to costume you. I got weapons for you.
You're
going to be a player character.
So I'm going to be a player.
We're going to have a weekend.
And we're going to have a weekend, and we're going to film it. But until then, I'm just going to let you know. Find these at Dying of Exposure if you're not already here. Subscribe on Facebook to the roles we play as well as Leota Gaming. So you can follow that on Facebook and then or like it on Facebook. You can follow Dying of Exposure at social media at Dying of Exposure or Twitch dying_of_exposure, as well as on Instagram. It has to have the underscores in it too.
Where you are playing in an exciting playthrough of Chrono Trigger.
I do play Chrono Trigger regularly. Noontime Nostalgia's to Mondays and Thursdays at noon Pacific for a couple hours a session, and then Tuesday night 7:30 Pacific is Through the Mill, which is the Western fantasy RPG that I game mommy for as the GM. I only chose that because DM, the only thing I could come up with was Daddy Master, and I got real uncomfortable with that. But GM as Game Mommy, I like more. And I didn't invent that. I picked it up from one of the various, both Daddy Master and Game Mommy are things I picked up from various other D&D podcast type things. But yeah. So follow us on all the things. And go LARP. Go investigate LARPing once we're no longer quarantined, right?
Yep.
Go investigate LARPing and look into it. It's fun. It's a way to find a community. It's a way to integrate activities with your friends. You know, if you get a few friends that really like it, you can always all kind of squad together and go. Like much like the pirate camping events or Renaissance fairs or conventions or tailgating at a sports game or like going and traveling to a nearby city with a few friends and just one around. It's literally just another affectation of a social bonding moment outside of homes that you can do. Go do it.
And if you need a success story, I went from a 400-pound agoraphobe who never left his apartment to a 300-pound extrovert who likes to hang out with people and do years and years worth of role-playing podcasts for some reason.
So many years.
So many years.
You did a whole that's how much you got into LARPing, is that you did a many years podcast.
A million years of podcasts.
Just like easily 100,000 eons of
till the heat death of the universe.
Ron will have a podcast about it. I will have died long before then, but Ron will still be here podcasting about various role-playing games.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. I am Ron. For Steve and the roles we play, I'll play myself out.